What I'm about to tell you about why you don't have friends will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about loneliness, connection, and what it actually means to be spiritually evolved. Most people think having no friends means something's wrong with you, that you're broken, antisocial, or failing at life. But the truth about spiritual awakening and friendship is so much more revolutionary than anyone wants to admit. If you've ever looked around and wondered why everyone else seems surrounded by laughter and belonging while you're sitting in silence, questioning why it all feels so distant, then what you're about to discover will change how you see yourself forever. Because what's happening to you isn't social failure. This is spiritual elevation happening in real time. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you're going to understand that your loneliness isn't punishment, it's preparation. Your isolation isn't rejection, it's recognition that you've outgrown the version of yourself that others were comfortable with. And that awakening, it's about to set you completely free. Here's what nobody talks about when they discuss spiritual awakening and why it destroys friendships. We're not dealing with you becoming difficult or antisocial. We're dealing with something far more profound, and here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. Your consciousness is literally operating on a different frequency now. You wake up one day and realize you don't belong. Not in your group chats where the conversations feel shallow, not in your workplace where the energy feels heavy, not even in your oldest friendships where the laughter now sounds forced. The things that once made you feel connected now make you feel like you're watching a performance from behind glass. But here's what's really happening that will blow your mind. Your spiritual awakening isn't making you antisocial. It's making you authentic. And authenticity in a world built on performance looks like isolation until you understand what's actually occurring beneath the surface. And this is where everything changes. What feels like disconnection is actually your soul tuning into a completely different station. You're no longer resonating with superficial conversations, empty entertainment, and relationships built on shared distractions rather than shared truth. Your nervous system is literally rejecting environments that don't match your evolving consciousness. Think about what that really means for a moment. Your spiritual growth is so profound that your energy field has become incompatible with spaces that operate on lower frequencies. You're not losing friends, you're discovering that most of what you called friendship was actually just social convenience held together by mutual avoidance of depth. But here's where the story takes an incredible turn. And this is what will make everything click for you. What you've been experiencing as loneliness during your awakening is actually something Jung called individuation. The process of becoming who you truly are rather than who others expect you to be. This isn't social failure, this is psychological evolution happening at the deepest levels. Jung understood that most people remain trapped in what he called the persona, the mask we wear to fit into society's expectations. But during spiritual awakening, that mask begins to feel suffocating. You start noticing every time you laugh when something isn't actually funny, every time you agree with opinions that don't resonate with your truth, every time you shrink yourself to make others comfortable. The discomfort you feel in crowds isn't anxiety. It's your newly heightened sensitivity picking up on emotional undercurrents that most people completely miss. You're not becoming fragile, you're becoming spiritually sophisticated, able to detect inauthenticity, manipulation, and energy that doesn't serve your highest good. Let me share what's happening neurologically that will revolutionize how you understand your experience. As your consciousness expands during spiritual awakening, your brain literally rewires itself. The default mode network, responsible for self-referential thinking and social conformity, begins to quiet. Meanwhile, areas associated with present moment awareness, empathy, and intuitive perception become hyperactive. Research from neuroscientist Dr. Judson Brewer at Brown University reveals that people undergoing spiritual transformation show decreased activity in brain regions associated with self-criticism and social comparison, while simultaneously showing increased activity in areas linked to compassion, wisdom, and interconnectedness. What this means is that your brain is becoming incompatible with shallow social interactions, not because something's wrong with you, but because something's incredibly right. You're developing what researchers call spiritual intelligence, the ability to perceive reality beyond surface appearances, to sense the sacred in ordinary moments, to recognize authentic connection from mere social performance. Dr. Francis Vaughan's groundbreaking work on transpersonal psychology shows that this heightened awareness often creates temporary social isolation as consciousness expands beyond conventional frameworks. And this is where it gets absolutely mind-blowing. The friends you're losing during your awakening, they're not really losses, they're revelations. Your rising consciousness is functioning like a filter, naturally separating relationships built on genuine resonance from those held together by habit, convenience, or mutual ego stroking. Your nervous system has become so finely tuned that you can feel when someone is speaking from their authentic self versus when they're performing a socially acceptable script. You walk into a room and immediately sense the emotional temperature. Who's genuinely present? Who's performing? Who's masking pain behind forced cheerfulness? Who's using conversation as a way to avoid their own inner silence? You can sense when a conversation has depth versus when it's just noise to fill silence. The difference between someone asking, "How are you?" as genuine care versus social politeness becomes crystal clear. You can detect when someone genuinely sees you versus when they're projecting their own unresolved issues onto your presence. But here's where the transformation begins. And this is going to change everything you thought you knew about social connection. What you're experiencing isn't social rejection. It's spiritual selection. Your awakening consciousness is naturally drawing boundaries around what kinds of energy you allow into your space. The exhaustion you feel after social gatherings isn't introversion. It's your energy system protecting itself from environments that drain rather than nourish your evolving spiritual awareness. Think about the last time you spent hours with people who only talked about gossip, complained about their lives without seeking solutions, or filled every silence with meaningless chatter. Your soul literally recoils from these interactions now, not out of judgment, but out of preservation. The conversations that feel unbearable aren't because you've become judgmental, but because your soul is hungry for meaning and can no longer tolerate emotional junk food. When someone starts complaining about their job for the 100th time without any intention of changing their situation, when the conversation revolves around celebrities or other people's drama, when every topic skims the surface without touching anything real, your awakened consciousness recognizes this as spiritual malnutrition. And here's what nobody tells you about spiritual awakening that will completely shift your perspective. The solitude you're experiencing isn't emptiness, it's fullness. It's your consciousness expanding to recognize that being alone with an authentic self is infinitely more nourishing than being surrounded by people who only know your performance. Throughout history, every great spiritual teacher understood this principle. Buddha spent years in solitude before his enlightenment. Jesus retreated into the wilderness. Rumi wrote his most profound poetry in periods of isolation. The mystic Meister Eckhart taught that you must learn to be alone with God in such a way that you are content whether people come or go. What feels like isolation is often your soul's intelligent response to relationships that were keeping you small, unconscious, or trapped in patterns that no longer serve your growth. Your awakening has given you energetic boundaries that protect your spiritual development from people and situations that would pull you back into unconsciousness. The anxiety you feel in certain social situations isn't social phobia. It's your intuitive wisdom recognizing environments that are incompatible with your authentic expression. Your body is literally rejecting spaces where you can't be real, where you have to perform, where your depth is seen as intensity rather than intelligence. Modern research in psychoneuroimmunology shows that authentic social connections actually boost immune function and increase longevity. while superficial or forced social interactions create chronic stress that suppresses immune response. Your body knows the difference between nourishing connection and energy-draining performance, and it's protecting you by making the latter feel increasingly uncomfortable. But here's where everything starts to shift toward your transformation. And this is the part that will leave you feeling completely different about your journey. Every friendship that falls away during your spiritual awakening is making space for connections that can actually handle the fullness of who you're becoming. Think about it this way. If you were a butterfly emerging from a cocoon, would you feel sad about outgrowing the caterpillar friendships that could only relate to your crawling stage? Your metamorphosis isn't a betrayal of who you were. It's the fulfillment of who you were always meant to become. Your isolation isn't punishment for growing. It's preparation for relationships that can match your depth. The loneliness you feel isn't evidence that you're unlovable, but proof that you're no longer willing to accept love that requires you to diminish your authentic power. The spiritual awakening process is systematically removing everyone and everything from your life that can't support your highest evolution. This isn't cruel, it's incredibly intelligent. Your consciousness is creating space for people who can not only handle your authenticity, but celebrate it. And this is where the real breakthrough begins. What you've been calling loneliness is often your soul's way of teaching you the difference between being alone and being lonely. Being alone becomes a sanctuary where you can finally hear your own wisdom without the interference of others' projections, expectations, and unconscious patterns. In solitude, you discover that your own presence is actually quite pleasant. You stop needing constant external validation because you're developing internal validation. You realize that the voice in your head doesn't have to be critical. It can be compassionate, wise, even playful. You start enjoying your own company in ways that surprise you. The silence you once feared becomes the space where your authentic voice grows stronger. In that silence, you begin to hear the subtle guidance of your intuition, the whispers of your soul's purpose, the gentle correction of your inner wisdom when you're moving away from your truth. The solitude you once resisted becomes the laboratory where you discover who you are when you're not performing for anyone else's comfort or approval. Without the pressure to maintain a persona, you start uncovering aspects of yourself that had been hidden for years. Your natural rhythms, your genuine preferences, your authentic responses to life. Your spiritual growth has been showing you that most of what society calls friendship is actually codependency dressed up as connection. Real friendship, the kind that nourishes your soul rather than drains your energy, requires two people who are each whole on their own, coming together to share their fullness rather than trying to fill each other's emptiness. Codependent friendships require you to be a certain way to maintain the connection. You have to stay small so they don't feel threatened. You have to stay stuck so they don't feel abandoned by your growth. You have to maintain your wounds so they have someone to relate to in their own pain. These relationships collapse during spiritual awakening because awakening consciousness refuses to participate in mutual limitation. But here's where it gets absolutely extraordinary. And this is what will leave you feeling unstoppable. The same spiritual sensitivity that makes shallow relationships unbearable also gives you access to depths of connection that most people never experience. Your awakening hasn't made you antisocial, it's made you selectively social in the most powerful way. You're developing what mystics throughout history have called spiritual discernment. The ability to sense who is operating from their authentic self versus who is still trapped in ego patterns. This isn't judgment, it's wisdom. You can feel when someone is genuinely present versus when they're mentally somewhere else. You can detect when someone's words match their energy versus when they're saying what they think they should say. This discernment extends beyond just social situations. You start recognizing which environments support your growth and which ones drain your energy. You can feel when a job, a living situation, or even a geographical location is aligned with your evolution or working against it. Your entire life begins organizing around what serves your awakening versus what keeps you asleep. The depth of emotional experience that makes casual friendships feel exhausting also gives you the capacity for soul-level connections that transform both people involved. Your heightened empathy isn't a burden, it's a superpower that allows you to see and hold space for others in ways that most people can't access. When you do connect with someone who matches your frequency, the depth of understanding and recognition is extraordinary. You don't have to explain your spiritual journey because they're living their own. You don't have to defend your sensitivity because they value their own. You don't have to tone down your insights because they have their own wisdom to share. Your struggle with maintaining superficial friendships has been developing your capacity for authentic intimacy. Every shallow conversation you've endured has been showing you what real communication looks like. Every performance-based relationship you've outgrown has been preparing you to recognize genuine connection when it arrives. Here's the truth that changes everything. Your spiritual awakening hasn't been isolating you from the right people. It's been protecting you from settling for connections that would keep you spiritually asleep. Every friendship that couldn't handle your growth was actually preventing you from meeting the people who will celebrate your evolution. The loneliness you've experienced has been teaching you to become so comfortable with your own presence that when others arrive, you're not seeking them to complete you, but to complement you. You're not looking for someone to fill a void, but to share an abundance. And now comes the most powerful realization of all. The friends who are meant for your awakened self don't need you to explain your spiritual journey because they're on their own. They don't need you to tone down your depth because they have their own, or they don't need you to perform because they're too busy being authentic themselves. These soul-level connections don't arrive through networking or trying harder to fit in. They emerge through resonance, the natural magnetism between people who are operating from their authentic truth. Your job isn't to force friendships, but to continue becoming more genuinely yourself, so that when these people appear, the recognition is instant and mutual. The spiritual awakening process has been refining your energetic frequencies so precisely that you'll naturally repel what doesn't serve your growth and attract what does. This isn't about becoming exclusive or elitist, it's about becoming so aligned with your truth that only authentic connections can find you. Think of it like this. Imagine you're a radio tower that used to broadcast on multiple frequencies to reach as many listeners as possible, but the signal was weak and filled with static. Your awakening has been teaching you to broadcast on one clear, powerful frequency. You reach fewer people, but the connection is crystal clear and profoundly meaningful. Your healing doesn't require learning how to make friends again. It requires understanding that the capacity for deep, soulful connection has been growing stronger inside you this entire time. The same spiritual awareness that made shallow relationships impossible is what will make sacred friendships inevitable. The research of Dr. Brian Little on free traits shows that people can act against their personality for things they consider personally meaningful. But sustained inauthenticity creates what he calls psychological costs that eventually become unbearable. Your awakening has simply made the psychological cost of performing friendships higher than the social cost of being alone. Treatment for your loneliness isn't about fixing your social skills or learning to be more outgoing. It's about trusting that your awakening has been preparing you for relationships that will nourish rather than drain, inspire rather than diminish, and celebrate rather than merely tolerate your authentic expression. Connection stops being about performing for others and becomes about sharing your truth with people who can not only handle it, but be inspired by it to share their own. Friendship transforms from social obligation into spiritual communion. Two conscious beings recognizing and celebrating the divine in each other. You don't need to become more likable to everyone. You need to become more authentically yourself so that the right people can find you. Your spiritual growth hasn't made you difficult to be around. It's made you impossible for unconscious people to project onto, and that's actually a gift. The goal isn't to have more friends. The goal is to have authentic connections with people who see and appreciate the depth of who you've become. Quality over quantity isn't just a preference for awakened souls, it's a necessity. Your nervous system literally cannot handle maintaining relationships that require you to fragment yourself. Every moment you've spent in solitude during your awakening has been developing your capacity to show up fully in relationships. You've been learning to be comfortable with silence, which means you won't need to fill every moment with noise. You've been facing your own shadows, which means you won't need others to carry your projections. You've been developing emotional regulation that allows you to stay present during difficult conversations instead of becoming reactive. You've been cultivating compassion for your own humanity, which creates space for others' imperfections without trying to fix or change them. Your journey through spiritual loneliness isn't a detour from connection. It's been the path toward the most authentic, profound relationships of your life. What felt like isolation was actually integration, preparing you to meet others from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. This isn't the end of your social life. This is the beginning of your spiritual community, people who don't just know your story, but resonate with your essence. These aren't the friends you have to maintain through effort and performance, but the souls who feel like coming home to yourself. The awakening process hasn't been making you antisocial. It's been making you selectively social in the most spiritually intelligent way possible. You're not too sensitive for friendship. Most people are too unconscious for the depth of connection you're now capable of offering. Your spiritual sensitivity isn't a barrier to relationships. It's your greatest gift for creating connections that transform both people involved. Every tear you've cried in solitude has been clearing space for joy shared with people who truly see you. Every night you've spent alone has been preparing you for community that celebrates, rather than merely tolerates, your authentic expression. The world needs what you've developed in your solitude. It needs your hard-won wisdom about authenticity, your deep understanding of what real connection feels like, your capacity for presence that can only develop through spending sacred time with yourself. Your spiritual awakening hasn't been isolating you from love. It's been teaching you the difference between connection and codependency, between friendship and performance, between being seen and being understood. And once you know that difference, you can never again settle for relationships that ask you to be smaller than you are. So trust the process, trust the solitude, trust that every friendship that couldn't handle your growth was making space for connections that will celebrate it. Your loneliness isn't evidence of your unworthiness, and it's proof of your incredible standards for authentic connection. And above all else, remember this: your struggle with maintaining superficial friendships hasn't been evidence of your failure at relationships. It's been proof of your success at spiritual awakening. You're not broken for needing depth, you're evolved. You're not antisocial for requiring authenticity, you're conscious. You're not just surviving the loneliness of awakening, you're transforming through it into someone capable of connections so profound, so authentic, so spiritually nourishing, that everything you thought you knew about friendship will seem like a pale imitation of what's possible. Your spiritual awakening hasn't taken your friends away, it's been preparing you to become the kind of friend and to attract the kind of friends that your soul has always been craving. And that version of connection, it's worth every moment of sacred solitude it took to become ready for it.